Asian markets mostly rose on Tuesday, but concerns about the Huawei row and broader China-US trade war kept investors on edge, with analysts warning that the crisis could rumble on for some time. Regional investors were spooked by a sharp drop in New York's tech-rich Nasdaq after Google said it was beginning to sever ties with the Chinese telecoms giant, days after US President Donald Trump's decision to buy it from the US market and put it on a sales blacklist. Tokyo's Nikkei lost 0.1% to 21,272 points. The Hang Seng in Hong Kong was down 0.33% to 27,713 points. And the Shanghai Composite was the only counter in the black, rising 1.2%. It closed to 2,905 points. US stocks slid on Monday as the White House's restrictions on Chinese telecom equipment company Huawei Technologies weighed on the technology sector and raised concerns that the move would further inflame trade tensions between the United States and China. The Dow Jones Industrial Average fell 0.3% to 25,679 points. The S&P 500 lost 0.68% to 2,840, and the Nasdaq Composite dropped 1.5% to 7,702 points. Let's get more on your markets now. We cross to Arabile Gumede, who is standing by at the Johannesburg Stock Exchange. Very good afternoon to Arabile. What's happening in our markets?
Yeah, good afternoon, Nzenga. Well, the market today perhaps slightly higher, but really not much to write home about following a 1% loss yesterday with regards to the JSE All Share dipping below that 56,000 point mark as well. So certainly things following through, right through from that Huawei and United States story with regards to the sanctions. Yes, the big news earlier today was that they've gotten a 90-day reprieve. A lot of that is not because Huawei has perhaps some businesses that they would like to sort things out with, but that Donald Trump is trying to give Silicon Valley some time to perhaps find new resources and new suppliers when it comes to some of the technology that they would require as well. That, of course, comes from Huawei. So a big deal with regards to that, and that filtered through into most global markets yesterday. Today, however, there seems to be a sense of positivity filtering through. The founder of Huawei even saying, of course, things perhaps are going to get a little more interesting. We'll unpack exactly what that means in just a little bit. But let's get into those numbers and see exactly how things are faring across the globe. Well, if you take a look at that market picture, they're a bit of a mixed one, really, when it comes to how things are faring across the board. Let's unpack all of it now with Viv Governor from Rand Swiss. Viv, thank you so much for the time. Slight positivity today following yesterday's weaknesses. I suppose a slight comeback in the market. Nothing to really write home about, though.
Yeah, rand driven, I would suppose. A lot of that comes through to the weaker currency, helping the resources on some of our offshore, dual listings as well.
Do we stay below 56,000 points? I mean, we can probably pick up above that, and but is it going to be a sustained, perhaps, drive, or are we just going to follow whatever happens with regards to the trade war?
Yeah, I think we are going to follow what's happening through the trade war, as well as what happens to our currency as well. The currency is obviously driving some of the improvements, like I said today. That being said, I mean, the rand, movements have been a bit erratic. Recently, we're probably a bit undervalued at the moment. We probably should be, a bit stronger than where we are right now. If you take away all the exogenous variables, just take a no news month, basically, nothing strong happening, we'd probably see the rand drift closer to 14 than it is right now. So that will probably be negative for the stock market. When it comes to other drivers in terms of, the stock market performance in Africa, I think we are seeing still a lot of weak growth in the country. So that's obviously another negative for the stock market.
It's very difficult for one to perhaps see through the noise with regards to this China-US trade deal, right? So how does one sort of trade in a time like this?
Well, look, I mean, in the short term, it does kind of make sense to stay away from some of these companies that are really affected, not just the tech companies like Nike, etc. Companies that depend a lot on importing from China will probably be negatively affected by this year. Maybe focus more on US producers and US stocks in the short term. But in the longer term, I do think it's going to be a bit of a toss-up. The problem is that, right now, China is smaller than the US. It's, significantly smaller. We've taken away purchasing power parity. PPP is something people put into place to just like kind of equalize the currency differences. Take that away, the Chinese are about 50% smaller than the Americans. But that change is going to go away within the next decade or so. It's like picking on your little brother. One day he's going to be bigger than you.
Exactly.
and in about 10, 15 years' time, that's going to be the situation. The Chinese is going to be bigger than the Americans. And they may not be poor or richer, Chinese, each Chinese person versus each American person. The Americans will be richer, but the Chinese as a whole will be bigger than the Americans. And in that situation, you will find, a bit of this turnaround coming around, I think.
And I suppose then with the Huawei story itself, then it does beg to differ to say, where exactly will Huawei sit at the end of this debacle? Whether they'll get back with regards to the things that are happening with the operating system, whether they'll get back into the relationship with Google if the US allows, or do you think that they will speed on ahead in trying to forge a way with regards to a new operating system and try to change the entire ecosystem? The fact that they're a new player in the market, well, been there for some time and have forged the way, surely it does give them some sort of hope.
Oh, it does, most certainly. In fact, in the longer term, this probably was quite negative for Google. What this means is that Huawei, which is the number 2 producer in the world right now behind Samsung, and Samsung and Huawei are both Android producers, and Huawei has grown immensely faster than Samsung has over the last couple of years, and is making huge inroads into Africa, into Europe, into Africa, into Eastern Europe, into towards Asia, because of the cheaper towards handsets and so on. Samsung and Apple are more higher end handsets. Huawei gives you a lot of quality, but for a far lower price, and has a name that's been built up as well. One of the things that Google has to do is basically cut their, the Play Store access for Huawei. But what that means basically is that Huawei is going to have to develop its own Play Store, its own equivalent to that. And in fact, a lot of guys go out and actually fiddle with the systems of Android phones to break away from the Google Play Store, because if you take away Google Play Store, you have a lot less restriction as to what you can download and what you can actually do with your Android phone. And so I think in the longer term, it's a real danger to Google if one of the biggest producers out there, maybe the biggest producer in a couple of years' time, decides not to be using Google's version of Android as their operating system. I mean, Amazon tried it, failed. But Huawei may have the possibility to actually do it because it's forced to do it.
Yeah. A famous rap artist once said, "Don't ever let the necessary occur." And if you let the likes of Huawei, for example, have to necessarily find a way, they certainly will. They've become very innovative over the years. Okay, let's talk about this coming week then. Quite a bit still happening. The MPC decides to sit today as well with regards to that interest rates decision that will come out on Thursday. The meeting starts today. Perhaps your thoughts, your suspicions, some elements of what you think they will do. I mean, a hold is the most likely prospect, but they will be looking out for other nuances, surely.
Yeah, I think they need to monitor the inflation issue. The rand being where it is obviously a big issue for South Africa. The oil price still remains above $72 a barrel, which is very troublesome. And with the Iran situation coming into play, I mean, we have, I think, another less than 60 days. It's quite a short time before India and China have to do something about Iran. And those are huge consumers of petrol. The Saudis have said they'll step in and support, more production, because the Saudis are quite against the Iranians. But that's a huge danger for South Africa, because we could see oil prices, depending on what the Iranians do to react to that, hit above 80 easily. Even beyond that, I mean, if the Iranians take this as being a declaration of war virtually, and they close the Strait of Hormuz, we could see, real restrictions happening in, transport of the Gulf. If they want to do things in Libya, which they have some pull in, to do things in Bahrain and other parts of the Gulf where they have a lot of Shias, we could easily see, oil prices spectacularly higher than it is right now, which will obviously mean a totally different inflation picture than we currently see.
Yeah, South African Reserve Bank. But for now, you reckon a hold, though?
Of course, definitely a hold, yeah.
How about for the remainder of the year, very quickly as well?
Look, I mean, it all depends on what the economy is doing. Like I said, if we do have a situation with the oil price doing crazy things, we might just have to see a raise. But I think they would like to be, cutting going forward. They can take some of the danger out if the inflation rate stays about 4.54. I mean, having towards the repo rate as high as it is gives a huge, real interest rate for South Africa, which isn't justified in this low growth economy. So I think ideally, without any news, without any shocks, we should be lowering interest rates over the next couple of years.
Yeah, one can certainly hope. Very bullish of you, but we can certainly hope. Thank you so much for the time. Rand Swiss's very own Viv Govender there joining us as we unpack that market picture right here at the Johannesburg Stock Exchange. Yes, some positivity coming through with regards to the Johannesburg Stock Exchange and the oil share for now. The Rand weakening, but as you can tell, even the oil price was set to go a little bit higher. It is sitting just at around $72.